Welcome to Christ Church Detroit on this actually rather beautiful sunny evening with a beautiful soup supper. Thank you to all those of you who prepared it, and with some extraordinarily beautiful music ahead of us tonight. We are so excited to have with us both Dorian Dillard and Alexander Jordan. Does it get any better? Nope, it does not. Dorian and Alexander each will be singing two pieces for us tonight, and we will be talking together about those pieces. Unfortunately, you know, it can get better than having both Dorian and Alexander here. We had been hoping and planning to have Pastor Lawrence Rogers of Second Baptist here with us tonight. He had something come up and isn't able to make it tonight, but he will be with us a week from tonight on the 22nd, so we'll look forward to seeing him right here next week and getting to know him and the story of Second Baptist and their role with the Underground Railroad here in Detroit. So tonight we have 4 spirituals. We have, who are we starting with first, you? Couldn't Hear Nobody Pray. Couldn't Hear Nobody Pray, arranged by Hall Johnson. Would you like to sing it first? Would you like to talk about it first? Some of each?
Every other line.
Right.
We can talk about it. We can sing it first.
Sing it first and then talk about it? All right, great. Wonderful. So Dorian will sing. I know many of us know each other, but in case we haven't had opportunity to meet, and for those of you watching on live stream from home, I failed to introduce myself. My name is Emily. I am the rector here. I'm very excited about that. And on behalf of our director of music, Ed Mackey-Schramm, and our whole staff, we are very excited about this program. Ed is one who can't be here tonight, so you will see me at the piano as well. Not stepping into Ed's shoes because those can't be filled, but simply playing a little in support of our soloists tonight. So, Dorian, shall we?
Yes.
Children
Likewise.
Oh, West Page.
Yes.
So, what brought this spiritual to mind and this setting of it?
I am a huge avid of Negro spirituals in general, and in the classical style. And one of the first composers that I was introduced to was Hall Johnson. Attending Detroit School of the Arts, the students are kind of just thrown into the things of the voice and the competitions and such things as state and district festivals, and so much so our teacher would assign us solo pieces, and you had to learn them on your own and figure it out. And Hall Johnson was one of those ones that I clung to and I loved. I loved his piano accompaniment. I hate that word. His piano part. I love his style, and he's one of my favorite composers. I recently had found one of his spiritual books that I wasn't privy to in my school experience, and I just ran through that book and learned some of his new arrangements. And this spiritual in particular was one that stuck out to me because it was very simplistic, but in the text there's so much undertones of perseverance and undertones of almost like you're never alone. And that really is what resonated with me the most in this piece, is even though the performer or the person that's reciting this text says that they're alone, but that they couldn't hear anyone else praying with them, they still found something in themselves to continue on. So that was one of the reasons I chose this piece.
Yeah, yeah. In voicing that feeling of being alone and not hearing anyone else praying or being there, one is actually making a connection, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, basically what I got from it is when, how do I say this? Basically, you have to go for yourself. Is really what kind of the undertone of this piece is, that even though you can look around and hope that someone will, be there to give a lending hand, but sometimes they're not, and sometimes everyone has their own individual things going on, so you have to go and dig deep and find that courage and perseverance to continue on for yourself. And I think that that's what I Couldn't Hear Nobody Pray really resonates with.
Yeah. So you're a composer yourself.
Yes.
Yes. So sometimes, not often enough. You need more, please.
Yes,
more, please.
I am. It was a joke. Yeah. I just, it's some hard stuff to sing, and but yeah, I am. I'm a composer myself. And really, what started me in composing was the choral arrangement of Negro spirituals and anthems by African American composers. I really was a choir kid that loved being enveloped in all of the sound and harmony surrounding me. So a lot of times that was misunderstood because I'm singing everyone's part when it's not there, and I'm looking for that harmony, and I'm the kid raising up their hand every 5 seconds in rehearsals, like the sopranos are flat here, altos are missing this note here, X, Y, and Z, and and everyone in the department hates me at schools. But it really is just from my love of music, harmony, coming together, and boy, did Negro spirituals launch me into that, especially arrangements and composers and arrangers such as Moses Hogan. Stacey V. Gibbs is a huge mentor of mine and a Detroit native. And there's so many that I could just name and go on forever. Hall Johnson, Harry T. Burley. And a lot of times these composers were not pigeonholed, but H.T. Burley worked with the likes of Dvorak very closely, So for his spirituals specifically, he wrote how he kept them simplistic, but there's so many art songs and other pieces by him that show the fullness of his musicality. So spirituals are a spoonful almost more than soup.
And different composers arrange them, find different angles to take,
Yeah.
even with the same spiritual and the same text.
Yeah.
There's so many genres within the, if you would call, you wouldn't even, maybe it's hard to call, maybe a misnomer to call spirituals one genre, right? Because
there's so many influences
right.
in those, and composers take their influence and their environment and add that to whatever spiritual that they're composing. And so many times there's even friction in the choral, well, in the composing, and you know, there are purists, people who want to keep, you know, the spirituals to its purest form as possible, and there are those who like to add their elements of jazz and add their elements of gospel and their elements of, you know, art, rhythm and blues. So there are so many angles, like you said, that one can take, and just to watch how so many composers and how they interpret those texts. I love hearing. I wouldn't mind doing a concert of one spiritual with 9 different arrangements of it. You know, that would be a really fun, interactive thing. Well, not interactive, but, you know, something cute to do and give. That's all.
You heard it here first. Cute. Yes, I love that. I love that. Well, even tonight we'll hear 4 different spirituals, but 4 different composers and arrangers. And Burley is one that we'll hear from you, X. Alexander. So we'll get a little bit of a sample of a very simplistic treatment, which was very nice on the guest pianist tonight. Thank you very much. And Burley's treatment, which is more on the spectrum toward Dvorak, a lot more full toward an art song, and you'll have more to tell us about that. Wonderful. Well, are you ready to sing too?
As ready as I'm going. Let's do it.
All right.
Is there a mute?
Yeah, it's right on the bottom. Yay. Oh, wait. I think X will need it, though.
Okay. Yeah.
Why don't you, do you want to tell us a little bit? Do you want to just introduce what you are bringing tonight? Yeah. Introduce your first piece, maybe?
Sure.
Okay.
So the first piece I'm going to do this evening is a piece by Margaret Bond entitled Lord, I Just Can't Keep From Crying. Reverend Emily and I were having a conversation beforehand, and she said, well, you know, what do you think this is kind of about? And I think that we all are well aware that spirituals are complex, regardless of how simplistic they may sound, right? Sometimes the emphasis is on the text. Sometimes the emphasis is on the music itself. And they all tell different stories. This one in particular for me, and of course we'll get a chance to talk about it a little bit later as well, but this one in particular for me captures a moment that I believe many enslaved people had to face, right? Which was that loneliness, much like Dorian's piece, right? In this piece, it is a snapshot of what do I do when there's nothing else I can do. I'm stuck here. I can't read, I can't write, I can't vote, I don't own property, I don't even own my children. What can I do? And so enjoy Margaret Bond's Lord, I Just Can't Keep From Crying.
Thank you.
Of course. You know how to do it now.
let's chat.
All right.
Wow, so that piece, especially in that, what are the words for that arrangement? It really does name the moment,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of through compose in that way.
Yeah.
So that term, through compose, just basically means that the composer has put the essence of the story there in the text, or in the notes as well. So, you know, if we're talking about a river running, it might just be some kind of trickling going on, like the rushing river or whatever. So that is through compose. And I think that Margaret Bonds does a very good job of that here, creating the essence of that anguish, that grief, that heartache in both the piano and in the vocal line. There's some dissonance and some resolutions and some things that are left open, and I think that it's beautifully put together.
I agree. There's the dissonance and the anguish, as you mentioned, and it shifts really rhythmically. It's like this dwelling in the anguish, trying to navigate it, knowing that it's gonna be there for a while, and like how can you just be in it for a while?
Right, and that's how it feels, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure anyone who's lived more than maybe 5 years, and maybe less than that, understands anguish, right? Have you ever tried to go to McDonald's and your mom says, "You got McDonald's money?" Like that is grief, right? I wanted my kids' meal, right? And so it's that same kind of thing of like it latches onto you in a way that even if there was no text, even if it was all just hummed all the way through, you would know that this isn't Yankee Doodle Dandy, right? That there's something deep, something that is resonating within the storyteller. And I can only imagine, you know, Margaret Bonds being the composer, that this is a reflection in some regards to how she felt. Margaret lived in the Midwest. She got her undergraduate and master's degrees at Northwestern. And during that time, Northwestern wasn't socially what it is now, right? And so she was there as a student. She was properly admitted and enrolled, but she was not allowed to stay on campus, right? Can you imagine, you know, your classmates, people that you sit alongside every day that may not be as good as you, are able to retire to their dorm room 50 feet away while you have to look for your own housing, first of all, be able to pay for your own housing, secondly, but then also have to deal with that commute in the winter. That's awful, right? And so, I think all of that, those kinds of policies are generally accompanied by language that isn't too nice. And so, I can't imagine being in a place where I wanted to just come to better myself, to express myself musically and learn how to properly do that, and feel at every turn that though I'm welcomed by law, I'm not welcome, right? And I believe, honestly, that she felt this as well. Like, what do? I just cry. Sometimes I hum to myself, I self-soothe. I wrap my arms around myself because none of my classmates will. You know, and I don't know if this has a direct correlation to that moment in particular in her life, but I would not be surprised if there wasn't some residuals of that she took along with her for the rest of her days.
Absolutely. I cheered as you mentioned Northwestern because I went there a while.
Well after Margaret, so I'm pretty sure it's fine.
Well, much more change is needed, and a lot of times, even in subtle ways that might not be reflected in policies have changed, right? To be more open and inclusive, right? But that doesn't necessarily track with the day-to-day experience.
Right.
We carry that in ourselves, even if on paper or online, everything's open, everything's great. The lived experience is often quite different than that, and the anguish and the shifting and just the navigation of a lot of dissonance is a part of every day.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, the lived experiences are of those who don't have the power to change anything in the first place, right? They're kind of just happy to be there because it was only by the skin of their teeth. And just to be met with pushback at every turn for just existing, that's tough. And unfortunately, it is something that my ancestors knew firsthand, right? I'm just alive. I just want to eat. I'm not causing any trouble. But we see that same message, that need for progress, that need to push towards true equity in this. This is a reminder of where we are currently, where we were previously, and how much work we have left to do to get to where we're going.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. As we were talking about these selections, I noticed that these two have some similarities to them musically. In the register of the voice, it's something though the Bonds arrangement had a lot more going on in the accompaniment, the piano part, than this particular Hall Johnson did. They are both rather introspective, wouldn't you say? We were talking earlier a little bit about spirituals and psalms in the scriptures, and how the psalms also it would be a misnomer to call a psalm just one single genre, because there's 150 of them, and there's, a good 5 or 8 solid categories of genres within those. And a lot of them are lament psalms. And the Bonds piece and both of these really sound to me like lament psalms, in that they are naming the lived experience in its anguish and in its injustice, naming that reality is not what we want to be living, but it is what we are living and what we are observing, and just where we are for a while. And in the Bonds, we hear that dissonance and the stasis and the anguish and the layers of dissonance and the shifting between them so much that it really sounded like lament in that way. And a lot of times in our general church worship, as we focus rightly so much on resurrection, we often lose sight of or lose the muscles of naming lament, like naming what's not, right? And giving voice to that in our worship. I believe that Pastor Rogers and I will be picking up on this thread next week, as we next week also start to look forward a bit toward Holy Week and our two churches' practices of Good Friday, naming that lament, witnessing to that, even as we know that resurrection is also happening. But our faith has us witness and name what's not right and what is unjust and wrong, even as we also hold the hope of resurrection too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think another, and this obviously is for most spirituals, I think that another similarity is this one-on-one conversation with God, right? Some of them, as I mentioned earlier, are stories. Some of them are roadmaps. Some of them are documentation of history. These are conversations with God. These are conversations to find solace amidst everything else that's going on. And I think that it's important, much like you were saying with the Psalms, to recognize that that they do fall in different genres, so that you can fully contextualize what we're meant to get from this. Because there was not an anthology, 300 years ago, but people knew, well, if they're singing Wade in the Water, I better be on time, So it's that kind of same thing of like recognizing that there are categories for this, for this music. And I think that this, and I Couldn't Hear Nobody Pray are both comfort songs. They are lament, absolutely. But if I come to you and I share with you that all I can do is cry sometimes, you're like, boy, me too. Let me tell you about it. And there's some beauty and there's some growth and there's some togetherness and some collective willpower that I think comes from that.
Yes. Yes. Who's singing next? We have a piece that's not on the program. It's not on the menu, but that's what makes it even more special. Who wants to sing next? You want to sing next? All right, awesome.
To
Do you want to go?
Yes.
We practiced, don't we?
Those were beautiful. So tell us why you brought them tonight. What's in Steal Away? What's in the Wide River? Burley, what do you want?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, for me, much like Dorian, Hall Johnson was one of my first inroads into the world of spirituals, but also, as Dorian mentioned, you can't go too far without running into some of Henry Thacker Burley. And so this piece actually I have the anthology at home, and they were like, you're a tenor, go. And so this is one of my favorites from his anthology. One, because again, and why I brought it tonight is that it's in juxtaposition to the first piece that I brought. One that was more introspective and more about that pain, which was so evident and palpable throughout a lot of spirituals. This one, of course, I mean, it's still kind of talking about dying a little bit, but This one has a little bit more jubilation to it. What's on the other side of that river is what I'm actually here for, as opposed to the anguish and the heartache of this world. And I find that that message is kind of beautiful, right? That despite everything that our ancestors had gone through, they still found something to hold on to, right? Even if it was just crossing the Jordan River. And so I couldn't not. Honestly, it's fun and it's relatively simple, but I think that it gets its message across. And I think once again, there's some beautiful depiction of the message of the piece in the piano. Thank you. It's I couldn't help but bring this one in. It's just a piece that I really enjoy.
It clearly, I mean, your enjoyment of it really comes through. You're right. It is a jubilant treatment of it, isn't it? And it's exuberant, and there's juxtaposition within itself. Certainly, also alongside the Bonds piece from earlier, but even within it, it's like that's a wide river. But one more river to cross.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
it's really wide. Just one more.
I guarantee you, it's smaller than the Mississippi. You know what I mean? Like the Mississippi is smaller, right? So if we could do that, we can do this. And yeah, I completely agree. It's who knows when we'll get to that river, right? We might live to be 198. If Methuselah can do it. But in the end, there's just that one. We've lived through all of this. We just gotta cross one measly little, very wide river, and we'll be homebound.
Yeah, and for many, it was this river, the Detroit River. That was the one more, right? This was on the Underground Railroad. Detroit was midnight. It was you're almost there.
Yep.
And I've heard Pastor Rogers also talk about how once you were at the station at Second Baptist, you knew you were almost there, and so. You have to imagine people singing it even right here at the Detroit River or at Second Baptist. Like, that's a wide river. There is peril from here, from Second Baptist to Canada. But it's just one more. It's within sight. And just how much emotion is in that. There's joy, but also such danger all at once. Yeah.
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 Why'd you bring your song, Frank?
Well, Still Away is a very, very beautiful spiritual that I have always thoroughly loved. I have always loved the simplicity of the melody, the basic arpeggiation of, literally 1, 3, 5, and I know I'm speaking real musical, but it's just such an easy piece for the musical ear to digest, and I think that was attributed to its text and the undertone, I love that word, the undertone of what the message is really saying, and there's so much in there about when stealing away to Jesus, and I love, and steal is a word that people don't use anymore, like, you never hear anyone say, yeah, I'm gonna go steal away to bed, So I've always thought that was an interesting choice of a word to use, and even looking at the play on what the word means and how we are used to, the bad connotation behind it. With someone steals something, it's a bad thing. But I think that there's the song is basically saying how to steal away to Jesus is to remove yourself and steal yourself from your problems, your issues, and especially in slavery, that was clearly rampant. So I think that Steal Away definitely is one of my favorites to sing, and to sing it a cappella and to just feel the spirit behind it and feel the weight of so many voices that have said those words, and Still Away is one that was used specifically for the word I'm looking for, signaling and using to sing and hum to give clues and hints to, we're leaving them out. You know what I mean? So the weight behind how pretty it is, but also there's a little eeriness behind it too that I think is really, really interesting, and which makes it, of course, one of my favorite spirituals. Yeah.
Well, your connection to it, everything that you just said, comes through. And I think that a cappella treatment, there's something in an accompanied version that, though there's a lot of ebb and flow and we listen to each other, and a cappella, it's just...
Naked.
Exactly, it's just naked.
Yeah.
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 Right. So all those layers of interpretation and feeling can happen just in the moment with no further coordination or orchestration. It's just there.
Which is how it existed in its purest form.
Right.
Right?
Right.
In the field, they didn't say, "Come on, bring out the piano."
All right. 4/4, count.
No one was doing that, and there weren't rehearsals on Wednesday nights. It was. This is how this is presented. This is how this piece makes sense, and this is how we communicate it. And exactly, it comes from the soul, and it might change each time, right? It might mean something different each time, and allowing that to live in a space unaccompanied gives you that freedom, right? The next time Dorian sings this, it will not sound exactly the same. And that's part of the beauty of this music, is that all of it was internal. There's so much of the music that we listen to that comes kind of pre-married to its accompaniment. But this music, these words that kind of come up from the inside of these people and is shared, is completely different. It's completely different. The message behind it and the feeling behind it is completely different. And so for me, I'm very honored that this is America's first type of original music, right? Because it is so deep, and there's so many things that we've been able to do with it in the time since it was used for its primary purpose. So yeah, just my 2 cents on unaccompanied music.
Please, 5 cents, 10 cents, please. Just help us connect. Just briefly, what are some examples of different forms that spirituals would take over the years? How did, from this very raw, naked, unaccompanied internal place, which itself is an internalization of different forms and songs from Africa and even from the colonies, such as they were, folk songs. How did spirituals continue to inspire and develop? For example, gospel, jazz. Can you even trace gospel, jazz, blues back to spirituals too? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot of the harmonic and melodic makeup of spirituals are what have created a lot of gospel music today. A lot of hymns to this day are based on spiritual melodies, and they are American sounds and the sound of America. And so many are, and even there's so many layers of, just like how we were speaking of earlier, of how spirituals, are they one genre? Are they a subgenre? Are they the hub genre of so many? And I look at them more as, I like the idea of the hub genre, where they're like an umbrella, and under there's blues, there's jazz, there's gospel. And really, I think what a lot of what draws them and ties them in together is the use of them was to soothe, and the use of them was to soothe one's agonies and one's pains, and that is where we got blues, and that's how we got gospel, and how we got jazz, especially jazz, but especially blues. And so many of those spirituals are the blueprint of that whole idea. Yeah, absolutely.
And I would take it one step further as well, is that you can go before, pre-spiritual, and find a lot of these elements in native African music, right? The play with, like you said, harmonics, of course, but also rhythm, right? It is at the core of this music, because depending on how the treatment of the rhythm is, right, it might give you a different message. We might be shouting today, or we might be crying tomorrow, right? And those kinds of things are very central to a lot of African music as well. When you think about the djembes and the talking drums, right? These things that were specifically crafted to be able to move along with the music, right? We find those same elements in spirituals. And because we find it there, we find it in gospel. And because we found it in gospel, we find it in blues. Because we found it in blues, we found it in jazz, right? And then rock and roll, and then, right? And so I think it's really important to continue to do things like this, because it reminds us of the fundaments of almost everything we listen to today. So it does go beyond sacred music, which I think is great. We are tricking everybody. But yeah, I think that like we really have to, we cannot disregard the fundaments of African music in spirituals, especially because we weren't allowed to make any, right? The drums were taken away from us, right? We weren't allowed to use instruments, and then we couldn't read and write, and then we couldn't speak our language, and then. And so this is how we got together, and this is how we found community, and this is how we shared with people who were a part of our new tribe, but we had no clue who they were in Africa because they lived hundreds of miles away, you know? So, yeah, there are traces of it all the way up and through, at least in this country for the last 400 years.
Amazing. Well, the bells, as we were talking, have signaled to us that it is 8 o'clock on the hour. Music communicating our story tonight. Would you join me in thanking X. Alexander and Dorian?
Yes, our guest accompanist this evening.
Thank you all, and thank you Desmond and Chuck for connecting us with all of you live streaming at home. Thank you for making time. Have a good night.